So hello, a warm welcome from us at the Center for Creative Leadership, or CCL for short. Welcome to this webinar called A Benchmark Study of Digitally Enabled Assessments and Development Tools. Your presenters today will be Jessica Diaz and Stephen Young. My name is Bert de Koutere. I'll be your moderator for today's session. And if you didn't know it before, at CCL, our sole focus is leadership development, education, and research. My role in that is member of the CCL Labs and Innovation. Today, we are sharing the details of a new study in which we ask senior HR and talent managers to report on the use of their digitally enabled assessment and development tools. You may even have participated in that study. Your first presenter, Jessica Diaz, is on the West Coast of the US. She's an adjunct research associate with CCL, currently completing her doctorate in organizational psychology at Claremont Graduate University. She serves there as a research manager for their leader evaluation and development lab, as well as director of coaching. And prior to her return to graduate school, she spent over a decade in leader development, specifically in the education sector. On the other coast, the East Coast, we have Stephen Young, manager of leadership analytics and senior research scientist. In his current role, he leads CCL's experimentation with new data analytic approaches and methodology designed to assist in transformations of individuals, teams, organizations, even societies. Prior to joining CCL, he was with Design Interactive, a bit more south in Orlando, Florida, where he was the lead researcher on several Department of Defense and Homeland Security contracts that involve design and development of tech-enabled assessments and development tools. So you're in good hands, and with that, I will let Steve take it from here.
Great, thanks, Bert. So from this webinar, you're going to walk away with a high-level understanding of what technology-enabled assessments organizations are currently using for leader development. We're also going to share concrete examples of how these tools are being used to drive continuous on-the-job development. You'll also understand what organizations are interested in adopting in the short and long term, as well as some of the rationale that drives those decisions. We're going to share our point of view and what these trends mean for the field of leader development. And we hope you're going to find this webinar a useful resource as you decide to shape your organization's own practices. So we'll begin by sharing some background information on the tools and the potential they offer. Then some insights from the survey and a series of follow-up interviews we did with a subset of participants. And then we'll leave time for a Q&A at the end. And just remember, you can submit those questions anytime via the chat. So leader assessment for development has been central to leader development, with over 80% of organizations using some form of it. In using the assessment for development, it's not new. We've long understood the importance of giving leaders insight about themselves. But in a 2018 white paper, we really shine the spotlight on a new generation of digitally enabled assessment and development tools, fueled by advances in big data and AI. These tools are offering a lot better precision, objectivity, scalability, and personalization. They're really freeing up humans to do more of that challenging work of making sense of and acting on the information assessments can provide. At the same time, these tools aren't just providing the feedback, they're also creating and triggering challenging growth opportunities and giving real-time support to leaders. And it's that hyper-personalized approach to that on-the-job development that can help leaders become more effective and sustain those change efforts over time, because they're really offering the ability to set very clear learning goals, giving you real-time feedback, access to expert knowledge, and coaching. So a central goal of leader assessment for development is an increased understanding of yourself. That helps leaders further capitalize on what they're doing well and focus on developing the areas that will have the greatest impact on those around them, as well as for their own personal success. But what exactly can we measure and give back to leaders? And at CCL, we developed a simple framework to categorize the different things we could measure in leaders. The first is the inner self, which describes who we are as individuals in terms of our internal mindsets, our motivations and feelings, and how we're functioning in terms of our emotions, our stress levels, our confidence. And once these things used to be unmeasurable, we no longer need to rely on our own perceptions to understand what we're feeling. For example, biometric data like what you can get from Fitbit, that can reveal some aspects of how the inner self is affecting our decisions and behavior. And there's, of course, more advanced wearables out there that are doing an even better job. The next is the outer self. So that's how we present ourselves to the outside world in terms of our words, our actions, and our interactions. Typically, this has been assessed by these trained professionals who rate leaders in assessment centers or individuals observing themselves after watching a video of themselves. But there are now more automated computer-based assessments of video recordings that provide feedback on your language, your voice, and some of those facial expressions. A tool, for example, is PitchVantage that's out there. And then finally, there's the others' perceptions of you. And this is how other people experience us through our words and actions. So it's the strengths and weaknesses overall we see in others. And traditionally, these have been assessed through popular tools like 360-degree feedback. But now there's newer tools like pulse surveys out there that supplement these data by allowing leaders to seek out and receive input from others anytime, anywhere. And we'll discuss in a little bit our experience using our own tool called SnapPulse in the context of leader development.
So since our foray into assessing leaders for development purposes in the 3 areas that Steve outlined, technology has advanced at a rapid pace and, as you all likely know, has quickly changed all aspects of talent management. So until recently, we weren't able to capture or analyze most of the information generated by leaders. It wasn't that they weren't churning out useful information, it was that we didn't have a way to capture it, to aggregate it, and then to deliver it back to individual leaders or to organizations in a helpful way. So the data and analytical techniques now exist, and as a result, the wave of digitally enabled assessments has really emerged, fueled by 3 specific advancements in technology. The first is big data. So as the world transitioned to a digital age, we moved our lives online, and in doing so, we created a wealth of data that's ready for real-time analytics. This large quantity of data is collectively referred to as big data. So put simply, we're now able to capture an immense amount of diverse information at record speed. The second technology is artificial intelligence. At its basic level, artificial intelligence, or AI, refers to the programming of a computer to carry out a task that, if performed by us, humans, would require some degree of intelligence. So AI employs a wide variety of algorithms and machine learning techniques to recognize patterns in speech, pictures, or other digital inputs. And finally, machine learning, which is a specific type of AI, lies at the intersection of computer science, statistics, engineering, and neuroscience. This allows talent professionals to take copious amounts of leader attributes and behavioral data to then determine how these metrics impact talent and organizational outcomes. So these tools have facilitated the development of a suite of digitally enabled assessments, ranging from online hosted traditional assessments that we're familiar with, all the way to pretty sophisticated technology like sociometric badges and wearable devices. So this slide here is depicting what exactly we mean by digitally enabled assessment and development tools, and it also represents the specific technologies that we assessed in our research. You'll see this slide again in a minute when we do a poll question. And also, if you're interested in learning about any of these technologies, we've included the definition for each of these in the appendix on the deck, which you'll receive following this webinar. So as I mentioned, these digital assessment tools capitalize on decades of psychological research while offering specific new advantages above and beyond the traditional assessments that we might be used to. So in the following slides, Steve and I are going to cover some of the key benefits of digitally enabled assessments that are unique above and beyond the traditional. So the first real benefit of digitally enabled assessment tools is scale. Traditionally, leader assessments have been reserved only for senior executives, primarily because administration, scoring, and follow-up cost time and a significant amount of money. However, digitally enabled assessments allow for dissemination at all levels of the organization. In our survey, 95% of all responding organizations are using assessment for development at levels other than their senior executives. This has grown from 70% in 2013 and 80% in 2015. In addition, this scalability is incredibly important when we think about succession planning. So by assessing leaders at all levels, we're equipping tomorrow's senior leaders with the skills that they need long before they step into that role. The second benefit is precision or personalization. So adding digitally enabled assessments to the mix of traditional can increase a leader's understanding of specifically where to focus for maximum impact. Additionally, they help increase both quality of feedback and quantity of feedback without overburdening our leaders. And of course, timing. So digitally enabled assessments have the ability to deliver real-time results, which essentially reduces the gap between insight and action. This means leaders can be assessed and then make immediate changes on the job. And as we know from research, getting more frequent and real-time feedback helps accelerate learning and change.
So the next benefit is objectivity. So assessments measuring sentiment, health, and well-being used to be limited to the self-reporting. But now the technology-enabled methodologies like wearables and social media analytics, they can deliver more immediate, objective, and data-driven information about how leaders are doing underneath the surface. The next benefit is integration. So it's important to remember that assessments are not an end unto themselves, but they're really a tool to drive development. And the ability to collect hordes of data isn't going to be helpful if we can't translate it into action. So technology is enabling us to integrate the insight and the action. For example, we see a lot of AI-enabled coaching tools assess leader actions and then provide ongoing advice and feedback to enable that continuous on-the-job development. And then finally, beyond benefits to the individual leader, tech-enabled assessments are fueling organizational learning. To assess bench strength, organizations are employing talent analytic teams to examine assessment results at the department and organizational level. And even more exciting is we can link the leader assessment results to organizational outcomes to predict the behaviors or leader attributes most likely to drive results. So this is allowing organizations to better prioritize their leadership solutions. They'll have the greatest impact on the leader and the organization. And we're already seeing many of our own clients move on this trend. So overall, digitally enabled assessments clearly offer several benefits, many of which have become even more critical in the current context. And to that point, before we share the results of our study, we're curious how COVID-19 has changed your use of or interest in digitally enabled assessments. So at this point, we want to ask you to use the link in your chat to share how COVID-19 has impacted your organization's interest in trying out new digitally enabled assessment and development tools. So we're going to click onto the next screen so you can see that slide again where we've defined what we mean by digitally enabled assessment and development tools. Now, as we wait for you all to answer that question, I want to share a quick note about a study that's relevant. It's a 2014 study. It was published in the Journal of Applied Psychology by researchers at University of South Carolina. And they used 12 years of longitudinal data from over 350 firms. And they found that firms that used more employee selection and training at their companies experienced greater labor productivity, which led to higher firm profit growth. So what this means is that organizations that are selectively staffing and training will outperform competitors throughout that pre- and post-recessionary period. And they found this after accounting for profitability in prior years. What they went on to say and talk about is that the selection and training really led to that generation of what they call slack resources that helped organizations recover more quickly from the effects of the Great Recession. This means that organizations that are having employees with the skills needed to do the work and trained up to the level that's optimal for their roles, they're better able to adapt to changes in the external environment. And so these authors really suggested that selection and training can be used strategically to weather recessions and the economic uncertainty. But of course, what we mean by selection and training methodologies are changing in the digital age. But the purpose is the same. It's really to equip those leaders and the employees with the knowledge and skills they need to succeed on the job. All right, so it looks like our poll has ended. And what we're seeing is that the largest category is a lot. So it does appear the majority of you are finding yourselves in a new and different world. And the digitization of really leader assessment and development, it was always coming, but the current context should be accelerating this transition more quickly. And so although the quantitative data in our survey was collected before the pandemic, we did hear in the interviews the current context is accelerating interest in these technologies. So with that, let's dig into the research now.
Great, thank you, Steve. So the survey that we deployed was out from August 2019 to about December 2019. And we surveyed close to 100 organizations across a wide variety of industries, led primarily by financial and technology. 57% of the organization had fewer than 10,000 employees, and 43% had more than 10,000. And this is important because we disaggregated our results by size, so you could see how organizations of different sizes are thinking differently about the adoption of digitally enabled assessments. Respondents were senior leaders who had both decision-making and purchasing power related to the adoption of leader assessments. And in the survey, participants were asked to indicate what technology-enabled assessments they currently use and which they're interested in adopting in the future to assess leader competencies and behavior, personality, health, well-being, and sentiments. Participants were also asked to share the barriers to adoption of technology-enabled assessments. And then, as Steve mentioned, in March and April of this year, we conducted approximately 16 interviews from our pool in order to better understand our survey results and to be able to provide some organizational examples for you in this webinar.
All right, let's take a look at what organizations are using today, beginning with who they assess. And specifically, technology is allowing organizations to scale their assessments to multiple levels of the organization. So 98% of all respondents indicated that they currently use some form of assessment for development. 20% of organizations are using assessments at all levels of the organization. And for those above 10,000 employees, this jumps to 31%. And then 95% of organizations surveyed use more than a single method of assessment with at least one population in their organization. So the average number of different assessments used by respondents across all leader levels was 9.23. So we can really take away from this that most organizations don't just use one assessment at one level. Rather, they understand the importance of triangulating results at many levels to deliver a more comprehensive and precise picture. So though organizations have long understood the need to use multiple assessments to assess each leader, this 9.3 is the average across an organization, not an individual. And actually at CCL, we did a recent study using several years worth of data where we found that the more assessments you do, actually the more likely people are going to drop out of your development program. we found the optimum number of traditional assessments for a single leader is 3, and you definitely don't want to use more than 5. So although organizations are using assessment for purposes other than development, like selection and high potential identification, our research focused exclusively on that used for developmental purposes. And organizations, though, are using these tools for a wide variety of developmental purposes, like identifying developmental needs at 84%. They're also a very key component of leadership programs at 75%. And then creation of development plans at 70% stood out. So the well-known industry analyst, Josh Bersin, he often frames the evolution of various HR domains as a maturation process. And so we developed our own model to describe the evolution of assessment and development and to help you all make sense of our study's results. So if we think of traditional paper and pencil assessment as level 1.0, then using technology to host and quickly tabulate results for these assessments is version 2.0. And in terms of the most popular tools today, organizations are still dedicated to these traditional assessments, made faster, cheaper, and more accessible through technology. In fact, for the top 5 assessments used for development today are those technology-enhanced traditional assessments. And so for organizations less than 10,000, you can clearly see on the screen that ranks very high. That's also the case for organizations above 10,000, but we should note that although these were the most common, plenty of organizations at this level, above 10,000 employees, were using those level 3.0 assessments. That is the more digital technologies. However, both sizes of organizations are using pulse surveys, really pointing to the importance of getting that immediate on-the-job feedback for development. However, our follow-up interviews found that there's variability in how pulse surveys are being used and what people mean. On one hand, it's select items on an engagement survey pulse that refer specifically to the manager's behaviors. On the other hand, there are a lot of other tools on the market that we found, and we've termed user-driven feedback tools. And we've conducted our own research on how to effectively embed them within leader development contexts. These tools are really letting leaders seek out quick, targeted, quantitative, and open-ended feedback on their own. And we've learned a lot about how to increase usage of these tools in the experience of creating our own. SnapPulse, our tool, really is enabling leaders to receive recurring intervals of candid feedback on very highly personalized development goals, so behavior goals, skill-based goals. And so leaders have the ability to get regular feedback on that goal that they set, and they have the ability to request what we call micro-feedback, or that kind of in-the-moment responses from colleagues following specific performance events like meetings or formal presentations.
Great. So in addition to asking what organizations are currently using, we also asked them about what tools they're interested in adopting both within the year and then within 3 years. So let's start by taking a look at what emerged as top trends for the coming year. So within this next year, we see organizations moving to level 3. Specifically, they're interested in adopting new technologies, but not just the technology, specifically ones that facilitate the integration of assessment and development. So as Steve mentioned, leading to a more hyper-personalized, real-time learning on the job. Essentially at level 3, we don't see assessments as standalone. They're highly connected or integrated with developmental challenges and developmental support. Here's our list of the top 5 tools that organizations are interested in adopting within the next year. So gamification has already established itself as a powerful tool for engagement, recognition, and even selection. But within the next year, we see buyers looking for these tools in the leader development space. So both organizations with fewer than 10,000 employees and those with more than 10,000 employees are interested in using gamification to assess specifically leader behaviors and competencies and as an approach to integrate with learning platforms. So to help us understand exactly what this might look like in the coming year, I want to share a couple examples from our interviews of how organizations are using gamification or gamified approach within the leader development space. So overall, organizations that opted for gamification generally did so to increase user activity and engagement in the learning process. So one manufacturing organization has used gamification to increase engagement in training among frontline production workers. They use badges to incent training among other gamification features. And they've also used the built-in data and analytics from their learning management system platform to identify individuals who show high learning agility. Then their HR team encourages these individuals to step up and become new project and team leads. A tech company that we followed up with is experimenting with the potential to use gamification to motivate self-directed leader development. So they're specifically interested in whether gamification can lead to high rates of individuals completing leader development programs on their own outside of a more traditional guided cohort-based setting. And then finally, another manufacturing organization gamified the process of networking at a large summit that they had for senior executives. So individuals were rewarded based on the number of connections that they made, which were tracked via a mobile app, and you could see people collaborating in real time. Although this information could be leveraged to drive development, it's important to share that in this conversation with company's leadership, the development program manager did express limitations. The gamified tool didn't track the strength of these relationships or even if they persisted over time. So as such, the organization is now putting in place a purposeful measurement system in order to better determine the return on investment on these platforms. And I think this raises an important point that sometimes technology can seem exciting and new, but it's important to really identify and understand how is this particular technology going to drive development. The other category of hot tools to be adopted within the next year are including technological approaches to digitally enabled learning platforms, including mobile and collaborative learning platforms and platforms that complement in-person coaching. So when we say digitally enabled learning platforms, it's important to remember that this can mean a lot of different things. The platforms of the future are not your standard video repository of learning. Instead, kind of the old school LMS is both recreating and rebranding as what Steve described as a micro learning tool. Learning experience platforms or now capability academies that are actually focused on business challenges. They're integrating sophisticated technologies such as AI and machine learning to help drive personalization and drive impact. However, one of our interviewers revealed that these platforms are constrained to the extent that they serve up high quality curated content and warned that we should not, at least right now, equate the quality of advice a platform gives you based on your search history versus the quality of advice an expert human provides based on observing you one-on-one. So essentially, these provide a really exciting opportunity, but have additional work that needs to be done to ensure they're driving development in the way that we want.
So a high-tech organization we interviewed, they use Workday Skills Cloud as an example to capture all of their job-related skills, their technical, their process, their people leadership skills. And this product is allowing organizations to build out internal talent marketplaces. So employers can easily find the internal talent and create more development opportunities for them. So this specific company uses that data to find people with the skills needed for different types of work. And so as individuals are going through the leadership development programs in this organization, which is a mixture of the face-to-face and virtual simulations, the leaders can update their profile with the skills they've developed, and their bosses can then verify these updates. So essentially, you're getting self-assessment and credentialing so that you can pinpoint what you need for different work projects in the future. So what I liked about this was it was a good example of how the formal HR system can be used to incentivize the use of the learning platform. Another organization that we interviewed reported a pretty frustrating experience with a well-known learning experience platform, and that was supposed to be that place where all L&D content goes. But they quickly found out that it was restrictive around who could set up the online programs. There was difficulty embedding existing third-party training content, and inflexibility when it came to letting other external partners access the platform. So they could not even, unfortunately, access basic completion rates easily. So it was supposed to be that one-stop shop for everything, but clearly was something far from that.
So considering future adoption within the next 3 years, we found that organizations will turn in particularly to how technologies can help leaders act on the data they receive from technology-enabled assessments in real time. So in this final level of maturity, specifically AI will be used to predict more precisely the areas that leaders need to focus on for higher impact. These predictions will be based on both traditional and digital data traces, and they may also even suggest challenging growth opportunities and provide real-time tips and resources to leaders. So of the 5 most popular assessments for adoption within the next 3 years, 3 of the 5 tools involve some sort of AI approach to coaching. So AI coaching tools use machine learning and big data to not just assess leader behavior, but then to provide leaders with personalized feedback or action steps that drive change. So although there are lots of formats of AI coaching, generally AI coaching takes one of 3 approaches. The first is an AI complement to a human coach. So in this model, leaders receive one-on-one coaching with a human, and then they might leverage the AI platform to set goals around their development needs, monitor progress, and even receive ongoing nudges or reminders to practice the new behaviors they'd established with their coach. As previously discussed, this can help more costly one-on-one coaching stick a bit more. The second type of AI-based coaching is video-based AI communication coaching. So AI coaching tool, this is an AI coaching tool that uses video recording to assess and provide feedback on communication skills. And then finally, the third type of AI coaching is a full AI leader development coach. So this is an AI-driven coach that's trained to provide either general or, in some cases, functionally specific leadership coaching, or to prompt leader actions, things like reflection or praising their direct reports. So all of these methods free up human coaches to do the work that machines cannot, to help leaders make sense of the information, to provide empathy and support our emotions, and to help us work on higher order skills. So in other words, we don't see AI coaches replacing human coaches, but rather these tools are providing the real-time feedback, the challenge, and support in the flow of work so that leaders can maintain their development on the job and achieve their goals. Essentially, it's like bringing your coach with you to your job. So Steve is going to share one example of this type of AI coaching and also highlight some important considerations for organizations that are interested in adopting AI approaches to both coaching and development.
So we're finding that employees are increasingly responsible for development in their own time, in their own space, with limited budgets. And there's a lot of tools out there that we've seen. The Ella tool, or Everyday Leader Learning Assistant, that's the name of our own AI tool that matches leadership advice to user questions anytime, any place they need it. Some of our clients who have been using it have found it helpful for leaders who need that real-time advice on the job. For example, when they need to deliver negative feedback or have to motivate their teams to meet a high-pressure deadline. And generally, we found that the quality of these tools really vary based on the extent to which they contain evidence-based models, tools, and other exercises. Some also vary in the types of dashboards of user activity that they give back to HR buyers, so you can get an aggregate sense of here are the top 3 things that all my leaders are asking questions about and need advice around. From our interviews, we learned that many practitioners are seeing the potential of these tools, but haven't had time yet to vet them and figure out where they fit among their leadership development, their current offerings. Some said they're really just busy getting the basics in place, like having a solid competency model for different leader levels. Others think these tools are going to be helpful for asking questions and getting expert advice, but maybe not for coaching yet. One respondent said that, leaders want to be heard and they want to be vulnerable. And so that part of development is going to be harder to replicate with AI. So in addition to having participants indicate the tools that they were interested in adopting, they also indicated those that were less interesting to them. But despite this rising organizational interest in the health and well-being of employees, organizations are less interested in objectively measuring it themselves. Our participant interviews revealed that trust in the companies that use these data must be very high. One organization, they use health and well-being information to benefit employees by developing a sleep better program and enhanced childcare benefits. But our data show that few HR leaders at this point believe they have that kind of trust within their organizations to do things like that. Second, tools that are raising privacy concerns or blur the lines between work and personal, they were also less likely to be adopted. These are including things like passive email analytics, digital footprint, and social media analyses, along with sociometric badges.
So Steve just highlighted, although people see the promise and the potential of many digitally enabled assessments for development, our journey of digital transformation is not without obstacles. Privacy concerns top the list of barriers. Employees at all levels expect their data to be kept confidential, particularly when that data is generated outside of the work context. So advances in technology have drastically expanded the kind of data organizations can collect, but ethical questions definitely remain around what type of data they should collect for developmental purposes. Large organizations rank this concern higher, likely due to the fact that they're a bit more keen to explore sophisticated methodologies that challenge privacy concerns, things like social media analytics or sociometric badges. At CCL, we strongly believe that individual level data should be confidential to the leader for their development. That way, leaders trust the data and they use it to improve. Not surprisingly, the second most popular barrier was cost. Although technology-enabled assessment may reduce developmental assessment costs long-term in terms of scale and replicability, and also reducing the need for things like live training, they do require significant upfront investment in forms of licensing, customization, and this is most true for things like custom-built 3D simulations. Interestingly, when we parse out our results by organization size, we find that 71% of organizations with fewer than 10,000 employees cite cost as a barrier, while only 57% of organizations with more than 10,000 share the same concern.
So from our point of view, we're in the middle of a digital transformation of a leader assessment and development. Although technology has certainly changed what we assess and how we assess it, we believe that the digitization of leader assessment development is going to have a more profound impact on organizations and leaders because it's really bringing real-time development to the job itself. By allowing leaders to get that real-time feedback, that challenge and support away from the classroom. Specifically, these tools are offering that hyper-personalized approach to on-the-job development. As I mentioned before, by offering real-time feedback, helping leaders set very clear goals, access to expert knowledge and coaching, among other core development features that make up evidence-based leadership development. And quite simply, these tools then are allowing us to redefine how leader development happens. As Josh Bersin has recently urged, HR professionals have to be thinking of this domain as a problem of what he calls driving results, not one of just collecting lots of data to see what's going on. In the next 5 years, we're predicting a significant shift from sole reliance on these traditional assessments and a move more toward the adoption of these new tools that are capturing a variety of traditional and digital data points on leaders. In accumulating all of this data, organizations are going to be better able to leverage the power of machine learning and AI to not just collect more information, but to really drive better leader actions on the job. At the same time, you cannot discount the power of face-to-face or live online leader development modalities. Recall the 70-20-10 guideline for how high potential leader development should be designed in organizations. It's really a rule that says you should have 3 types of experience to learn from. And using the 70-20-10 ratio, challenging assignments is about 70%, developmental relationships is 20%, and coursework and training should be 10%. So that well-designed, though, coursework and training should have an amplifier effect by really clarifying, supporting, and boosting the other 90% of your learning. In fact, we found that the digital learning tools introduced within our face-to-face or live online programs, in doing that, it can actually lead to a high degree of stickiness and use of these tools back on the job. So to conclude, we see many of the digitally enabled assessment and development tools fitting within that 70%, which is often that neglected part of leadership development. However, we're reframing the 70-20-10 by saying it's about putting experience at the center of leadership development and surrounding it, though, with the digital tools and resources to really challenge and support learning from that experience.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen and Jessica, for sharing the numbers, the research, and making some meaning of it. We will move into Q&A now. Before we do that, I have a few announcements, which gives people still the opportunity to put in a few questions in the chat if there are any. So, will you get the slides? Yes, you will get the slides. After this webinar, you'll get a link where you have a PDF of the slides. By the way, you have not seen all of them. There's some very interesting material in the appendix of the slides with all the details of the full study. You will also receive a short follow-up survey link. This has been a webinar on assessment and for development. So please let us know, give us your feedback so we can improve. And finally, we also have an exciting announcement. We're working on a book. We plan to publish it in summer 2021 on this very topic, the future of leader assessment and development tools. So if you have experience in your organization to implement digitally enabled assessment and development tools, please consider volunteering for a 30 to 45-minute interview with us. And you can indicate that willingness for an interview in that follow-up survey as well. These interviews would really be an opportunity for you and your stories to be part of this important publication and will help shape this field. And as a thank you, we will then provide you a complimentary copy of the book. So on to the Q&A. I have combined a few questions as they came in. The first question or questions were around prioritization, really. So for example, if you are at a certain level, maturity 2, you're doing online traditional assessments, but you suddenly have budget constraints, what is the one thing you should be looking at? Or in a more contemporary way phrased by somebody else, what advice do you have for organizations which are interested in upgrading digitalization, but due to COVID-19, we're in business recovery mode? So is there anything we should prepare for when it's time to invest again?
Definitely. This is Jessica. I'll take that question, Bert. It's a great question, and I think even more relevant in today's context. So when we think about the types of tools and the purpose of tools, returning to Josh Berson's kind of call to action to drive results, I think about what's a tool that you can adopt that's relatively inexpensive and that can be used to really drive results. And to me, pulse surveys comes up as kind of the most efficient and effective way of moving into the next realm of digital assessment tools. So pulse surveys allow for a wide variety of users with little additional cost. And most importantly, they are integrated into on-the-job learning and experiences. They also put assessment and development in the hands of the leader. So the leader is able to ask for feedback or ask for input at any point using pulse surveys, both from their colleagues or their direct reports. And this we find increases motivation in using the information and really then therefore drives development. So if I had to prioritize one tool, and even more so in today's current context, I'd probably look at pulse surveys across an organization.
Thank you, Jessica. There were a few questions coming in that all have to do about the survey itself, so I'll combine them into one question. So I'll read them under. There are three sections. Is this all qualitative data mainly? So is the impression right? This is mainly qualitative research. Then the second one is if nonprofit organizations were included, and if not, why not? And the third one about the survey is if this data will be published or publicly available in some way.
Great. I can take that also. So the first question was around a qualitative or a quantitative approach. It's actually a hybrid. For use of the tools, we provided participants with a list of all of the technologies and focus areas. And for each one, people indicated whether they were not interested, currently using, interested within 1 year, or interested within 3 years. So that's actually more of a quantitative approach. And then for the other items, folks were able to enter in additional information, but the primary choices for things like barriers were quantitative. So people were choosing from answers that were already there. And then, of course, we did follow it up with interviews, which were purely qualitative research. I think the second question was about nonprofits. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So we did actually have a few nonprofits in our sample. We offered for organizations to take it broadly. We didn't provide an eligibility criteria around the type of organization. So we did have some nonprofits and government and education folks in our pool, although the majority of respondents were for-profit organizations. And then the last question was around publicly available data. So the full survey results are actually located in the appendix of this PowerPoint. So you'll be able to see the full results across all questions. And then, yes, we do intend to publish the results at some point. And I think, Steve and I would love to keep everyone on this webinar aware and abreast of when those are available for the public.
All right. Then there was a question and seconded by somebody on, can you describe a bit about how validity and reliability come into play with these newer digitally enabled assessments? It seems like a very important question in this area.
Yeah, I can take that question. Yeah, what validity and reliability means in this new world is different than what it meant in how you go about doing it with traditional surveys and assessments. There's a little bit of discussion about that within the IO Perspectives journal for technical readers of that journal, where the challenges are that the data are so much bigger, they come in faster, and so how do we, as if you're not a psychologist, how do you make sure that you're checking on those things? There's some things that won't change. So if you're, of course, we're using this for development, but we like to put as much rigor behind our developmental assessments as possible, and looking at adverse impact and looking at differential prediction. But other types, I think, of how you go about showing validity and reliability will depend on the nature of the data. As another example, we're doing research on text-based responses to a question about what is your key leadership challenge, and we have thousands and thousands of data there. And we're using different machine learning techniques to analyze those data, both unsupervised approaches like topic modeling and supervised approaches that are more classification-based. And ultimately we get, models of how leaders are scoring in terms of their responses to those questions. And we also have data that is performance data, criterion data, and other measures on the 360. So we are correlating scores at the individual level for leaders in terms of what they're saying in their text responses, and seeing if there's relationships, as we would expect, with other performance measures. And we are finding, patterns of relationships that do suggest validity. So I think you have to really look at each technology on a case-by-case basis to really figure out what makes the most sense.
And Steve, I think you raise a great point there at the end, which is that people's reliability and validity processes are very different. And so it's really important before adopting a new technology to do your due diligence to ensure that it has been validated and that it is reliable.
Thank you. There was another question which is simply stated, but the answer might not be. How do we ensure that implicit bias isn't part of the tool? Anyone want to take that?
Sure, yeah. I think that there's some good guidance as well out there about things that have always been what we do to make sure there isn't bias. The EEOC, their guidelines and recommendations, it's in an article by, I believe, Rich Tonowski from the EEOC. If you Google him in the Industrial Organizational Psychologist magazine. But, he has a full list there, and those still ring true, such as making sure that the sample that you're using the new tool on is very diverse. If you develop a tool and try to use it and you've used a very non-diverse sample, you're likely to lead to issues there and bias being, within the tool itself. So he's definitely got a nice checklist there to kind of look through and make sure you're following to, make sure you're compliant. Of course, that is most relevant for selection, but, I've always believed, developmental assessment should be just as rigorous as possible.
Okay, let's switch from the tool to the people who need to support and implement this tool. There's a question. Please describe the competencies that OD or talent development staff will need to support this future state. Any side on that?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer quite yet, but I'll share an insight from interview. Just that this was echoed as a challenge for our participants, that a lot of times these technologies require a relatively high degree of technology literacy amongst HR staff. Both in terms of navigating the logistics of technological assessments and their implementation or deployment, but then also in the ability to sort of read and analyze the data. And so I do think it's a concern that's shared amongst folks in the talent management space, that how do we simultaneously equip our HR leaders with technology skills needed to really maximize the use of this assessment. Steve, do you have thoughts on what those specific skills might be in addition to those raised by participants?
Yeah, I would also echo in the interviews that came through at an interview I did a few days ago, actually, that implementation of these, you're best served by having someone with a technical background within your organization that can help implement them and project manage them. I do think that HR professionals should really look at criteria they're using to vet a lot of these tools, and making sure that you have a list that you use and that are really based on what is right for your business. I think it's very easy to be wowed by all of the features and the really pretty user interface. But in the white paper that we did a couple of years ago, we list a bunch of fundamental questions that all practitioners need to ask themselves when looking at what they want to do, so you don't make a costly mistake in spending something that may not offer you value. So things like, will it give leaders new insights beyond what you're currently doing? Is it allowing the developmental process to go faster, allowing more leaders to focus on actual development? And those questions are listed in that white paper. And what we say there is answer those fundamentally about everything. Mm-hmm. But then, think about questions around, is the assessment culturally sensitive? Is it valid? Is it free from bias? So making sure that you've got people in your staff, you don't have to know that yourself, but that you have, some sort of expertise in psychometrics and data science. And you can get those skills from your local university. You don't have to hire someone on staff necessarily to allow you to get, that expert input before making a decision.
Then I had a couple of questions coming in. Well, basically, people like some names, if we want to give them questions like, would you please release some of the names of the popular assessments now or in the future? Also, are there platforms with both assessment and training objects on the market today? So I don't know if you want to name any names or give a generic response here.
There's a lot of tools out there. A group that I really like and enjoy their research, it's called Red Thread Research. They put out a really nice review of learning technologies within the last several months. And I'd recommend following them and looking at that report. It's called the Learning Tech Ecosystem. And they show you 8 different categories or something of the platforms out there, gamification, things like that, video-based assessment, and they have examples of vendors on there.
Perfect. Thank you for that reference. We have time for 2 more questions. The first one is the million-dollar question, literally. Any research on the use of these tools and the impact on business performance?
Great question. Yeah. Do you want to talk about linkage research, Steve?
Yeah, I think that a lot of these tools, actually in our own experience developing our own tool, we set out really trying to do an experiment and really getting a nice experimental group and a control group to look at the impact of, our own tool, SnapPulse. And most people are struggling. What we found when we first started this a couple years ago, just getting the tool to have a good user experience, so leaders actually use it and you get usage. And so through that, we really focused our tool on making sure a very good user experience where we get 100% participation or close to it without forcing people to use it. So that really is an ongoing research stream that we've engaged with clients. And it takes quite a bit of time then once you've got a tool with people using it, where you're developing leadership skills, which takes 6 months to 12 months. And so I think that research stream is really emerging. It's active research we're engaged in. And what I would say is there's not a ton of research out there at this point, but I think it'll be coming out soon.
And then the last question, and I think you already gave an example because you mentioned the SnapPulse tools, but basically, let's make it personal. What is CCL's direction or vision moving forward on this topic on digitization of leader assessment and development?
Yeah, I would say that last slide that I went over, that really does describe, pretty well our vision. We don't see live online or face-to-face programs going away. They're super critical. But what we do see is, the evolution and emergence of more digital learning tools like the ones I've described that we've developed and we're continuing to develop out that are really about enabling leaders to develop on the job, that 70%, so that they have tools in the moment that they can get anytime, anywhere to help them set good goals, get feedback, expert advice, enable live coaching on demand, peer networks, stress management. These are the principles and things CCL knows make evidence-based leader development happen, and we've known this for a very long time, in a non-digital world, and they're the same principles, research-based principles we're using to develop out our suite of tools. And so we'll continue to do that in the future, to fulfill our mission of helping leaders advance for the benefit of society worldwide.
And in the appendix, Bert, there are a few of those tools highlighted along with links to learn more information about some of the work that CCL is doing in this area.
Well, that brings us to the top of the hour, and to quote somebody in the chat, very helpful and interesting areas we are seeing emerging indeed. So thank you everybody for joining this webinar from CCL and the CCL Research and Labs community. Keep an eye on your inbox. You will be getting a link to the slides with the appendixes, which you haven't seen yet. You will get the survey, even a link to a white paper. Let us know if you are available for an interview for our upcoming book. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.